Alright, so this is the lecture on accessibility in digital design. And we'll start with the question of why do we make things accessible? Hopefully you don't need to go further down on this list of bullets than the top one, which is it is the right thing to do. It is fundamentally the ethical thing to make sure that our services, products, or experiences are open to all individuals regardless of disabilities or limitations whenever possible. If that's not enough of a motivation, and you need some business ones, first it will increase the number of your potential users. If you limit your product or service's reach because you do not make it accessible, then you are fundamentally limiting the number of potential users of your product or service. Just because what your considerations of your typical customer might not involve folks with disabilities or different limitations, that doesn't mean they couldn't become customers. Next, the steps we take to make a web page or application accessible also make your web page or application more understandable by search engines. So all it does is support your overall searchability of your web page and application. And lastly, if you need, it's also required by law. So it is illegal to have an inaccessible web page or app for most private companies and situations, and all government agencies or organizations, from local all the way up to federal. So a little discussion about the law. This came about first by a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals case in 2019, Robles v. Domino's Pizza, which held that the ADA applied to Domino's website and application, and that it was not accessible to a blind or visually impaired user. Following that, the Department of Justice adopted the rule that is 28 CFR Part 53, was effective in June 2024, that stipulates and creates the regulatory framework for digital services being subject to ADA requirements. It also adopts the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 AA standards as the minimum that is required of websites and web pages, and we'll go into that in a little bit. Fundamentally, we just also have to acknowledge, right, that failing to provide an accessible website or application for public use violates the ADA's prohibition on discrimination against people with disabilities, and it is a violation of their equal protection rights under the 14th Amendment. Now when we look at specific accessibility needs, the two large ones are support for individuals that have visual disabilities or auditory disabilities, but there are significantly more. So for visual user support, we look at color blindness impacts and specific color restrictions that we put on websites for folks that, to accommodate people that might have color blindness. We use alt text, which is embedding text information into images or non-text content so that screen reader programs can interpret that for blind users. We also use multiple cues, so we'll use you can use color as long as it's not the only way of communicating information. So we could use color, text, spacing, auditory. Think about an example as like a stoplight, how we have colors that tell us what to do at a stoplight, but also if you were colorblind, the position of the light that you're seeing would also tell you where that is. That's using spacing as well. For auditory user support, we look at captions, embedding sign language whenever possible or interpretation, and volume control that's independent of the system volume. on different items or automatic playing audio. There's also a lot more than this, and we'll get into some of those here shortly. So when we look at resources for designing, there's as we discussed, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, version 2.1, AA. There's 3 levels. There's single A, AA, and AAA accessibility. AA is the minimum required. There's 18f.org guide. So 18f was a federal public design entity within the U.S. Digital Service until recently, but when that organization was dissolved, a lot of the former employees of that organization duplicated the 18f resources, which had a lot of valuable guides and things. So they're at 18f.org. We also have A11Y checklists and support. A11Y is a kind of initiative or movement around making sure things are accessible for all folks. A11Y is obviously a play on Ally. And then automated tools are a resource. There are automated accessibility checkers that you can essentially feed your website or application into, and it will give you a report. And I would just recommend that you be careful there, because just like these ramps, they might have the best intentions, but they're not foolproof and should not be the only thing that you use. You should be using intentional accessibility auditing processes by design trained professionals. And we also want to remember that our driving purpose for all digital design is empathy for our users. That's the entire foundation of everything we've been talking about. So for most people who are disabled, it's also important to realize that often the way the world is fundamentally put together does not always work for them, and sometimes is openly hostile to them. Speak with folks in your life that might be disabled or have certain limitations about the challenges that exist out there for them. If you speak to a wheelchair user about sidewalks, for example, like the fundamentals of modern infrastructure are not really easy for them to handle sometimes. So it's important to remember that, and that drives back to the point of, we're not the users, and we need to make sure we engage with them whenever possible. So now we're going to look at some resources. So let's see. We're going to start with, I'm going to move a couple of these things around just so it makes a little more sense. So first, we're going to start at the Ally project. So this is a great resource for understanding kind of the steps that are required. It has a lot of good resources on like how to build these things, but then we're just going to look at conducting an accessibility audit really quick. So if you were trying to conduct an accessibility audit, we would go here. Here's these 3 levels that I discussed. Ideal support for the Ally project is AA, but remember that's also the minimum requirement for the DOJ rule on the ADA. So single A, this is essential. This is the kind of fundamental baselines to have any assistive technology be able to help your users understand your design. AA is your ideal support, and AAA is for specialized support. So you'll see AAA guidelines if you're developing some kind of service, for example, for deaf users, you would have a higher level of support required because the purpose of that is for those specialized audiences. And then we have success criteria. A caveat here that the checklist won't do it all. You do need to involve some professionals if needed to ensure. But in here you can go through and check this down. It has links to some of these aspects and different references that you can look at. So this is a huge benefit to look at. Now looking at the 18F guides. So again, 18f.org is where these guides were reproduced. So if we look at the accessibility section, these are kind of the big highlights, right? Like tools, keyboard access, images, color, those kind of things. It also has a really great breakdown of accessibility testing tools. This is really valuable, especially if you are a more typical user. You don't have any of those limitations. You know, being able to use this is helpful. In addition, obviously, to robust user testing with those folks. So there's a bunch of different government sites and tutorials. There has been a lot of changes happening this year, you know, early 2025 to a lot of these services. So some of these may not, links may not go to where they used to, but they're there. And we always have the W3C's accessibility guidelines. So this is a very valuable resource. Now if we look at, so W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium. We have, this is kind of their general designing for web accessibility tips page, which is helpful. But let's say you really want to see what the guidelines are, and in this lecture we're not going to go through every one of them, mainly because, as you will see, there's a lot of them. So this is the, and you can find this just Googling WCAG 2.1, you're going to find that. But as we go in here, for example, we talked about alt text, so having text alternatives. Here's the guideline. Here's your success criterion for a level A, and it breaks it out as we kind of go through this. So remember, as you're going through these things, you know, you have to, depending on your use case, I guess, if you're a major corporation or a government, you will be looking for your success criterion to match level AA. But again, as you can see, there's so many of these. This is a very thorough set of guidelines that has been incredibly helpful to folks who need these accessibility aspects. They do provide a quick kind of checklist as well. This is just a quick reference, and you can customize it. You can filter based on different things here. So like for us, if we were like, well, we only can use AA, then we would just look at AA. So you can adjust this as you need, and this will provide specific things. I do like here that in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, this will provide a lot more details on how to actually comply with some of these things. So in terms of using specific labels in your HTML, this is helpful as you interface with your development team. Also, there's some really great stuff out there on the ADA website on web accessibility. So you have that kind of this general breakdown of examples and, you know, when the ADA will require content to be accessible. The rule, like I said, was effective June 2024, but it did give a certain deadline, let's say, for different entities to be compliant. So here's the rule, the fact sheet on the rule at least, on what is required. So this has been interesting to look at. For example, how long do state and local governments have to comply with the rule? Um, it's coming up next year for most larger entities, and the year after for smaller organizations or governments. And then if you have interest in the legal stuff, right, here's the case, the Robles case. If you're interested in taking a look at the opinion, it's there. And then if you're interested, like I gave you that 28 CFR Part 35, this is that. So this is be the rule. If you would have interest and you want to delve into what all this stuff is, you can take a look at that. But yeah, I really wanted to just make this a point of how important accessibility is. We've talked a lot about ethics and the reason we do these things, and none of that is really exemplified better than when we look at accessibility and making these things, leveling that playing field for folks who have these limitations and making sure they can participate in life the way we all do. So this is definitely something that is incredibly important. Even before the legal requirements were there, but now that the legal requirements are there, it's even more important. So I hope that going through this was helpful, and exploring some of these resources will help you make sure that your designs are accessible. So, all right, thanks.